She'd worked 12 quiet years without a headline. No scandals, no shortcuts, just steady shifts and small-town trust. Sergeant Claire Rains signed in at 6 p.m., as always. She checked her belt, tapped the radio once, habit, not worry, and nodded to the dispatcher through the glass. Outside, the desert evening came on like a slow breath. Dry wind, sodium streetlights, a sky the color of cooled ash. Her nights had a shape. North Loop, River Road, Depot. Back through the neighborhoods where porch swings creaked and dogs learned which cruiser meant treats. Claire knew the town's rhythm so well that anything out of step rang loud, even if it looked like nothing. On paper, October 12, 1983, was a copy of the night before. The only odd thing sat under a metal clip on her clipboard, a patrol printout with a faint pencil arrow bending her route toward Quarry Road. Not her sector. Not her assignment. No log note explaining why. She folded the page back. She'd ask later. At the corner diner, Alma poured coffee without a word. Claire left a tip and stepped into the crisp air. A neon payphone hummed behind her. Somewhere, a porch chime hit 3 notes and let the wind finish the tune. At 9:54 p.m., she keyed up. 3 Adam to dispatch, checking a possible 1066 near Quarry Road, solo approach. Her voice was even, no rush, no tremble. She expected a quick look and a routine code 4. Dispatch answered, copy 1066 3 Adam, advise on status. Then the town kept breathing. A TV laughed from a bar. A freight horn rolled through the valley. A hallway clock at the station clicked to the next minute. Claire didn't call back. A minute became 5. 5 became 20. Somewhere between 10:02 and midnight, the line that always answered became a hallway with the lights off. At 12:27 a.m., another unit traced her usual loop. No cruiser by the pull-off. Gravel looked clean. No fresh rut lines, no scuffed brush. Nothing to tell a story. Morning found her sister Marla at the front desk with 2 coffees and a face that made people talk softer. She was told the word departments use when they don't have one yet. Assessing. She asked about the car ping. The answer was a shrug wrapped in system error. She asked about a search grid. Soon. 16 years later, a dry season would peel back the land and give an answer nobody wanted. But that night all anyone had was a steady voice, a pencil arrow, and a silence that felt deliberate. The town wore routine like a well-used jacket. Sunset slid behind a low ridge. Porch lights clicked on in the same order most nights. If you stood on Main long enough, you could set your watch by the bakery's back door clatter. The bus rolling in at 15. And Sergeant Claire Rains easing past the feed store right before 1810 on her first loop. She signed in at 18Y. Always. A nod to the dispatcher through the glass, pen to the log. A quiet evening. She checked the belt, radio, cuffs, light, then the small rituals that kept her centered. Tightened the bootlaces, smoothed the sleeve, breathed once before stepping into the lot. The habits didn't make her careful. They made her calm. Calm served people better than speed most nights. Her route rarely changed. North Loop, River Road, Depot, West Tract. Then drift through the neighborhoods where she knew which mailbox leaned, which porch light flickered, which old hound would trot out for a scratch. She wasn't soft. She was present. Kids waved. Store owners knew the shape of her shadow on their windows. If trouble came, it tended to show itself first as something small. A noise out of place, a tire track across fresh dust. A parked car that never parked there. Quarry Road wasn't on that list. It sat a few miles out, a service track that served contractors in the board. Not her sector. Not on her Tuesday-Thursday night pattern. When quarry calls came in, they were routed to the county unit or to a paired patrol. Never solo approach. Claire had said that line herself during briefings. Quarry and ridge lines are 2-person checks. No exceptions. Which is why the pencil arrow on her printout and added bend toward Quarry Road wasn't just odd. It was wrong. At the diner, Alma had watched Claire scan that page, crease setting in along her brow. "You good?" Alma asked. Claire had shrugged like it was nothing. It probably was nothing until it wasn't. People in town would later say there was no sign, but there were always signs if you were the kind of person who noticed them. Claire was. So was her sister. Marla taught 3rd grade and kept her classroom like a ship. Tidy, lit, steady. She was the one who remembered the spare key that wasn't on Claire's ring and the way Claire wrote dates, day first, then month. She could spot the difference between Claire's pencil and someone else's. That pencil arrow wasn't hers. Marla was also the person who could walk into a room and make everyone stand up, straighter without raising her voice. She showed up at the station just after dawn. 2 coffees and a cardboard tray, one with cream because that's how the night dispatcher took it. You win people by knowing small things about them, Claire had told her once. Marla believed it. She set the coffees down and asked the only questions that mattered. Where is she? What have you done? What happens now? The answers were shaped to keep panic low. We're assessing. We'll notify county. We're running it internal first 6 to 12 hours. The watch commander said, internal, like it was a blanket they could pull over a problem and let it breathe. Keep the phones quiet. Don't spook the town. Wait for the callback that usually comes. But Quarry Road didn't care about protocol. And silence doesn't care about comfort. The internal window meant no sirens across the grid. No daybreak press release, no immediate wide area canvas. A second unit retraced her standard loop. Clean. A deputy drove past the quarry pull-off undisturbed. Someone phoned County Air. Hold for confirmation. The night swallowed the gap between 2202 and Darwin 27 like it had planned to. 2 details bit early and refused to let go. First, the emergency tracker in Claire's sedan should have left a breadcrumb. It didn't. The ping history came back with a word that looks like a shrug on paper. Null. Second, the maintenance ticket attached to that same tracker showed a tidy stamp no one wanted to see that morning. Closed. Closed when? Closed by who? Closed how? The answers when they arrived were the kind that move past you sideways. Phrases like system error, back-end rollover, will escalate. Marla stepped outside to breathe desert air that already felt hotter than it should. Across the street, a boy pedaled by with a fishing rod. The day had the nerve to keep going. She thought about Claire's route like you think about a song you've heard 100 times. You know where the chorus lands. When a note is missing, the absence is loud. She drove the path herself. North Loop, check. River Road, check. She slowed where Claire tended to pause. At the light where the crosswalk signal stuck. At the corner where an old motel sign blinked out of rhythm. None of it told her anything except that the town still expected Claire to appear where she always did. Routine is a promise folks make to themselves. It isn't a shield. Back at the station, a young officer glanced at the clipboard printouts like they might arrange themselves into sense if he stared hard enough. Quarry Road was still there, a thin pencil line nobody would own. The commander lifted the phone to call county again, then set it down. Give it until noon, he said to no one in particular, the way people talk when they hope time will return what it took. By mid-morning, the plan had the shape of a plan without the weight of one. County air support was requested, then queued, then reprioritized. The handler for the K-9 team answered on the second ring and said he could be on site in 40 minutes. 2 hours later, he was still waiting on a green light that never came. Volunteers began to call the station asking where to meet. The front desk took names, numbers, and told them the same word on every line that day. Stand by. Standing by is a kind of silence that looks cooperative. On a map, it leaves the same mark as not looking. The first search pass was cautious and small. Shoulder-high sweep grass beside the pull-off, a slow walk along the service track, a drive-by of the quarry gate. Gravel red is undisturbed. Sagebrush kept its secrets. Whoever wrote the manual for how to search without making it a scene would have been proud. But scenes have gravity, and this one was already pulling. Word traveled in the thin, efficient way it does in towns like this. Through the diner counter, the hardware store checkout, a teacher's lounge, the sheriff's niece who works afternoons at the post office. It wasn't loud. It was present. And with it came the first rumors, the kind that don't ask to be true, only to be repeated. Someone said Claire had filed a complaint about an arrest the week before. A bad stop. Thin probable cause, a report that didn't line up. Someone else said the supervisor over routes had no recollection of adding Quarry Road to her printout. If I touched it, I'd initial it, he told the deputy, hands open like a man showing he carried nothing. The pencil arrow on Claire's page carried no initials. In a back office, 2 officers compared last night's log timestamps to entries that should have matched movements. One line, 21:54:10:66, made sense. The absence after did not. Maybe the car's logger glitched, someone offered. Or rolled over the records at midnight. Then why is the maintenance ticket closed? Another asked. The room didn't have an answer that fit in a sentence. Marla moved through Claire's apartment like a conservator, careful not to disturb what might later matter. She noted things not because they were dramatic, but because they were ordinary. The Tuesday note on the fridge, see Marla 27, sat beside a receipt for dry cleaning dated the next morning. The houseplants were watered, not abandoned. There was a half-read library book on the arm of the sofa with a due date next week. These are not the objects of someone who intends to disappear. On the desk, the metal lockbox still without a key, a tidy stack of patrol maps from prior shifts. None of those maps showed Quarry Road on her loop. Marla compared handwriting, strokes, the pressure of the pencil. Claire's lines were consistent and faint. This arrow was darker, pressed harder, like someone leaning over a page that wasn't theirs. Back at the pull-off, wind pressed a ribbon of dust along the verge. A deputy crouched beside a shallow rut, then shook his head. Old, he said. Days, maybe. He stood, looked toward the ridge where a helicopter should have been a sound by now, and listened to nothing. We're losing time, he said to no one. The K-9 handler called again. Am I rolling or not? The answer was soft bureaucracy. Hold. Command wants to avoid spooking the quarry crew if this turns out to be a misread. The quarry crew didn't start for 3 more hours. The dog waited in the shade of a truck that wasn't moving. At lunch, the watch commander briefed a small room like he was trying to keep a room smaller. We're still internal, no press. Volunteers on standby until county confirms. We don't need a circus out there. Someone asked about the dispatcher tape. He said they were pulling segments. Someone asked about bridge cams on River Road. He said they'd been scraped last month, budget thing. Someone asked about the tracker null. He said tech would call back by end of day. Marla did not wait for end of day. She took a thermos, a notepad, and drove a slow, deliberate circuit from the diner to River Road to the quarry turnoff. She spoke with a gas station clerk who remembered Claire waving 2 nights ago, with a ranch hand who didn't see a cruiser after 10, and with a teenager who claimed he heard something like a car on gravel late, which could mean anything and often does. Grief makes time elastic. Suspicion makes it sharp. By afternoon, the town had both. At the station, the young officer who'd been staring at printouts earlier laid 2 pages side by side, the radio log and the unit movement sheet. He drew a pencil line between 2202 and 027 and labeled the gap with a single word in the margin, blind. He looked at the pencil arrow again and pressed the page flat with his palm, as if the pressure alone might reveal who had leaned over Claire's route and nudged it toward the place where partners are required. Routine had cracked. The question was whether anyone in charge would admit the sound. He asked to meet where the coffee was bad and the blinds were always half closed. Off book. No uniforms. Noon when a diner is loud enough to hide a quiet conversation. He was 22 then, older now by the kind of years that don't show on a calendar. A rookie from that fall, Darren Holt, the kind of officer who still ironed creases into his sleeves and apologized to dispatch when he keyed up too fast. He slid into the booth across from Marla, eyes tracing the room, then the window, then the room again. I liked your sister, he said first, like a confession. She didn't make a show of it, she just did the job right. He told her about the night in pieces the way memory does when it won't walk straight. His beat put him near the service road that skirts the brush behind Quarry Road. Not her sector, not his either, but you pass it if you run the loop wide. Around 2234, he caught taillights angling off the main track, not a full turn, just a slip into the scrub like someone who didn't want to be noticed doing a thing that's usually noticed. The height of the lights looked like a cruiser, maybe. He keyed up to ask if another unit was logged there. Dispatch said no, negative. He took a breath. Then another voice came on, not dispatch, short, just said, let it go. Marla leaned forward. Whose voice? He stared at the laminated menu like the names of people could be listed between the tuna melt and the open-faced turkey. I won't say, he answered. Not out loud. His hand tightened around a paper napkin until it wrinkled and split. He hadn't followed the lights. He'd told himself he was staying in lane, that he wasn't going to make a dust cloud where there didn't need to be one, that if someone wanted backup, they'd ask. Rookie logic wears a badge. It also wears fear. A week later, he typed a note into the logbook. A redundancy. Most officers skipped because the radio logs kept the official time, but redundancy has a way of keeping truths alive when systems don't. Reroute 9 p.m., he wrote, spelling it the way he'd heard it said, fast. Swallowed. Then he added 2 letters at the bottom like everyone did on paper they thought might matter. Ciao. He swore later he hadn't meant the letters as a signature so much as a mark for the person who'd told him to leave it alone. Initials shared, initials borrowed, or initials requested. He wouldn't clarify which. Maybe he was protecting himself. Maybe he was protecting someone else. Maybe both. Months passed. He carried the feeling like a coin in his pocket he didn't want to spend. Then the case cooled in public and heated in rumor. He started waking up before his alarm to a silence that sounded like radio static. He looked at his own hands and saw hesitation. The job requires many things. One of them is the ability to turn toward the thing that is not yet a problem and see if it wants to be one. He wasn't sure he'd done that, so he quit. No scene, no protest. He boxed his shirts and turned in his badge. Fear, yes. Shame, also yes. The kind that comes when you realize the space between I thought someone else was handling it and no one was is wide enough to lose a person. At the booth, he reached into a worn folder and slid a torn page across to Marla. The top edge showed the ripped binding holes. The bottom corner carried those 2 letters, HL in pencil that had smudged into the paper grain. The middle line read as if whispered, Reroute 9 p.m. The right margin had the ghost of another note erased to pale, SRVR detail, as if he'd nearly written the word taillights and then thought better of it. He didn't stay long. He kept his head down as he left, as if the act of speaking creates a wind that might tip chairs over. When the bell on the diner door went quiet, Marla read the torn sheet again and again until the waitress brought another coffee she didn't remember ordering. Back at the station, a young officer compared the unit call sheet for that night with the radio traffic. Holt's unit wasn't scheduled anywhere near Quarry Road. There was no record of him keying up about taillights, no auxiliary notation, no cross-sector assist logged. A gap where a line should be. A voice that told him to stand down that lived nowhere on paper. Let it go is a small sentence. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It just aims a person away from a place at a moment when distance can be the difference between seeing and not seeing. Marla folded the torn page and slid it into a plastic sleeve. Evidence is often just a thin thing you choose not to lose. Her name was Gloria Salas, retired now, living in a stucco duplex that faced the kind of quiet you earn. She kept a neat yard, a radio on the kitchen counter, and tucked in a banker's box beneath old holiday lights, a copy of The Night That Went Missing from the archives. Dispatchers don't look like first responders, but they live inside the first 8 seconds of every emergency. Gloria had worn a headset for 19 years. She could tell you which officers cleared their throat before keying up, which ones rode their mic too hot, which ones smiled when they spoke. She remembered Claire's voice because it never wasted syllables. When Marla called, Gloria hesitated. She'd been careful for a long time. Then she said, "Come by. Bring a notepad." The duplex smelled like lemon oil and dust warmed by afternoon sun. On the table, Gloria set out coffee, a yellow legal pad, and a plastic cassette case labeled in her block letters, 1983, 10, 12, night reel, copy, GS. She tapped the label with a fingernail. "We weren't supposed to keep personal copies," she said, "but I made one when the tape room started losing reels." She explained the system back then. Analog reel-to-reel in the main log. Smaller cassette dubs made at shift end for quick reference. Officially, dubs were temporary, overwritten every week. Unofficially, a few dispatchers, old-timers, who didn't trust temporary, kept a labeled box just in case. Gloria slid the cassette into a shoebox recorder that looked like it belonged in a history museum and pressed play. The speaker crackled and warmed. Routine traffic rolled by. Plates checks, a noise complaint, a welfare call, a 10-8 here, a 10-97 there. You could hear the hum of the room under it, the soft clack of a keyboard, the breath between words. Then 2202. A clean key-up, no panic in the carrier. "Claire, 3 Adam to dispatch. checking at 1066 near Quarry Road, solo approach. Gloria, on the tape. Copy 1066, 3 Adam, advise on status. She hit pause and looked at Marla. Do you hear her tone? That's steady. No stress in the breath. Not a car stop yet, just eyes on something that didn't fit. She scribbled on the legal pad. 1066, suspicious person, charmed vehicle. Underlined it twice. Code for something's off, going to look. She pressed play again. The reel moved forward. Other units checked in. You could hear someone else touch the channel. Just a click, as if a mic keyed and released without speech. Then a quiet stretch where Claire should have called back and didn't. Gloria stopped the tape and crossed to a small metal file drawer. From it, she drew a photocopy of the official transcript for that night. One Marla had already seen. One that showed no Quarry Road call. The line for 2202 was blank in the official version, a thin bar of nothing between 2 routine entries. When I asked about the gap, Gloria said, I was told it was a calibration error during the copy. But I was on shift. I heard it. And I kept this. She tapped the cassette again like it was a witness. Marla leaned in. Why erase a simple 1066? Gloria stared at her own handwriting for a long beat. Because it ties Claire to a place in a minute, she said. And sometimes, if someone wants to make a night look smooth, they sand down the corners. She rewound and let the crucial seconds play twice, then 3 times. Steady voice. Clear code. No edge in the words. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like procedure done exactly right. Call in, look, call back. Only the last step never came. Gloria's jaw worked, the way people do when a memory keeps trying to walk out of the room. I told my supervisor about the gap when the officials pulled reels for the archive. He said we'll reconcile it in post, and then the post turned into never. The next time I checked the archives, that segment was gone. Not corrupted, gone. We didn't have a button labeled erase, but we had people with keys. Marla wrote it all down. Model of recorder, label on the cassette, times to the second. Names of people in the room that night. The notation, tone steady. Not frantic. She asked for a copy. Gloria shook her head. I won't let this tape leave my table, she said, then softened. But I'll play it as many times as you need. They listened again, once with eyes closed, mapping the night by sound. The slight room echo on Claire's mic. The airy hiss of the bass channel. Gloria's own voice, calm and practiced. Then the dead air that felt like a door held closed by a palm. Do you regret keeping it? Marla asked. I regret that it matters, Gloria said. Before Marla left, Gloria handed over 2 pages. 1, her handwritten shift notes. 2, a side-by-side print she'd made years ago. Official transcript in one column, her typed reconstruction in the other. The right column held the 2202 line. The left column held white space. It's not proof of what happened, she said. It's proof of what was said. Sometimes that's where you start. Marla slid the papers into a folder beside the torn log page from the rookie. The weight felt out of proportion to the sheets. Thin things you choose not to lose. On her way out, the kitchen radio, still low, gave weather for a dry week ahead. Land that refuses to drink often returns what it's been holding. The call came late and careful, a voice pressed flat to keep from shaking. No name, no story. Just coordinates. North Gully, South Ridge Line. Below the old service road. You'll know it by the split mesquite, the caller said, then hung up. The number traced to nowhere. The kind of burner that dies the minute it's done. Marla wrote the details on an index card and carried it to the station like it might evaporate in daylight. The desk sergeant logged it as a tip and stapled it to a lead sheet. Somebody put a yellow flag sticker on the corner, which looks official until you realize a yellow flag is a suggestion, not a plan. The gully in question sits where the land folds in on itself, dry wash, loose shale, a thin lip of limestone that can hold a tire mark for months if no one disturbs it. You could stand on the service road above and miss it entirely unless you knew what you were looking for. A mesquite that split like a tuning fork. 2 trunks V-ing toward sky. A unit drove out late afternoon and idled at the pull-off. The deputy looked down, squinted at the heat mirage, and decided the grade was too steep without rope or a second person. He filed a note that read, Sightline check negative. The yellow flag stayed a sticker. By end of week, the lead sheet picked up new handwriting, filed as false. Lead, with a box checked for insufficient specificity. The coordinates were specific, enough to find on a topo map and trivial enough to dismiss if you didn't want to climb in. A month later, the town signed a contract it had been circling for years, an off-road training course to boost a thin budget. The site plan looked tidy in a council packet: graded lanes, safety berms, a staging lot. The gully and ridgeline sat inside the footprint like old script under a fresh coat of paint. In the permit file, the topography lines softened into design curves, art replacing contour. Bulldozers have a way of turning questions into level ground. People notice the timing. Not loudly at first, no one wants to accuse the land of complicity, but quietly at mailboxes and gas pumps. "Did we ever look there?" Someone asked to someone who didn't have permission to answer. A chorus of shrugs can feel like policy if you hear enough of them. Marla did what Claire would have done. She started a spiral notebook and wrote dates down. She logged who said what, when, and with what words. She kept copies of permit stamps, council minutes, and the lead sheet that called the gully a false trail. She underlined the phrase insufficient specificity. She circled the part about the split mesquite, then drove out to find it. It was there just as the voice had promised. 2 trunks sharing one route, shade falling in a narrow triangle over powder-dry sand. In that triangle, something like a drag line ran 6 feet and disappeared into gravel that had been shifted long ago. She took photos with a disposable camera. The prints came back too bright, the details thin. She kept them anyway. Thin things kept on purpose. The course went in with the season. A grader's blade shaved the lip of the gully. A front loader moved a hill that had wanted to be a hill for a long time. The service road got a new layer of crushed stone. A chain-link fence went up with a sign that said Authorized Training Area. Authorization is a word that decides where curiosity stops. At the diner, people stopped saying assessment and started saying avoidance. Trust isn't an on-off switch, more like a dimmer that someone keeps sliding toward dark. A church bulletin asked for prayers for clarity. A shopkeeper took down the little blue ribbon in the window because she couldn't tell if it meant bring her home or stop asking questions anymore. Marla didn't argue in public. She documented. She made a list of everyone who had touched the tip: the desk sergeant, the deputy who filed the sightline note, the watch commander who initialed the false lead box, the clerk who stamped the permit, the council member who moved to approve the contract. Not to accuse, just to remember. Memory is a net. If you tie enough knots, fewer facts fall through. One afternoon, she met a surveyor in a hard hat at the fence line. He'd worked the pre-grade. "We changed the contours," he said, pointing with a rolled plan tube. "But you can't change the soil. Water still wants the same paths it wanted 50 years ago." He wasn't saying anything. He was saying everything. She wrote "Water remembers" in the notebook and underlined it. When the first training day came, engines stitched a new sound over the wash. Dust rose in purposeful ribbons. The split mesquite stood just outside the fence like a witness turned away by a rope line. Marla sat in her car with the notebook open and listened to the ground accept a use it hadn't asked for. If you want to make a question hard to answer, you don't have to burn the paper. You can just change the landscape around it until the original shape is hard to see. The year the river refused to rise, the valley showed what it had been keeping. Late summer. A heat that felt like a hand on your back. 2 hikers cut off the main trail to chase shade along a dry wash. The waterline, usually a brown whisper, had retreated to stained rock and a few stubborn puddles. That's when the first hiker stopped and pointed into a gulch, a narrow chute of packed silt and sun-baked clay. What they saw at the bottom wasn't a rock. It was a roofline, sun-peeled and the color of old bone. A whip antenna lay bent like grass. One headlight bezel, half buried, held a pocket of dust fine as flour. They climbed down slow, shoes sliding on shale. A faded stripe appeared under their hands, the ghost of red and blue in chalk. They didn't touch anything else. They scrambled out and found a payphone that still worked. By afternoon, a perimeter line glinted in the heat. Deputies stood where the wash cut into the ridge. A tow crew staged on the service road above. Someone walked the rim and shook their head at how the car had dropped into a slot no one would find unless the ground chose to show it. The winch did its work in inches. Mud clung like a memory. When the cruiser finally tipped and settled on the flat, the shape became official. A dull badge on the grill, paint that read as department issue under the dust. The VIN plate at the windshield corner corroded but legible enough for a clerk with a magnifier to nod. It matched the number Marla had written on the inside cover of her notebook so many times the paper felt thin there. They opened the doors like a story you don't rush. Interior shot to pieces by heat and time. Cracked dash, collapsed seat foam. No camcorder mount. Scratch arcs on the dashboard where one used to live. In back, a seatbelt fused into a twist. The trunk resisted, then gave. Inside, air that smelled like damp glue. A tangle of rotted documents sealed in plastic sleeves. And one manila folder with a title written in block capitals that had bled, then dried into certainty. Q-root. Chain of custody began in a field notebook. Time, date, names. The investigator lifted the folder into a fresh evidence bag. Paper, when it survives, becomes a kind of survivor. Back at the lab, they let the pages acclimate. Under normal light, the ink on the top sheet sat like a rumor, visible but weak. Under UV, the letters darkened into the line someone had tried to write small and final. It wasn't supposed to go this far. The hand wasn't Claire's. Marla knew. She had birthday cards and recipe notes and 100 lists to compare it to. The slope of the T, the way the dots on the I drifted, the pressure pattern, none of it matched. Lower right corner, 2 letters, faint but cleaner than the rest, written like a sign-off or a habit, HL. The lab tech circled them, then wrote initials present? In a margin. Someone in the room said the rookie's name under their breath like sound could make a thing too real. Reporters learned fast, hikers, car, VIN, found in a dry gulch. The evening news used words like closure and breakthrough because television has to tidy nights into stories. The town didn't feel tidy. It felt like a door stuck for years had finally moved and then stopped again with a sound you hear in your teeth. At the site, Marla stood beyond the tape and looked down at the mark the car had left in the clay. A trough with walls as neat as a mold. The split mesquite was visible from this angle, its twin trunks making a narrow V toward the sky. She flipped her notebook open to the tip card and touched the words with a finger, not to check them, but to remind herself that she had not imagined them. The investigator in charge walked over, said her name carefully, and explained the part of the process that sounds comforting if you don't know what it means. We'll review, we'll send items for enhancement, we'll update you when we can. Marla nodded because there are only 2 options when you hear those sentences, nod or shout, and nodding keeps doors from closing. Days later, the lab called back with the kind of precision that lets you feel the edges of a thing without yet touching its center. The VIN was a clean match. The folder was department stock from the era. The UV note had been written with ink that fluoresced like late 80s ballpoint, not early 80s, suggesting it might have been added after the disappearance, maybe after the first searches, maybe years later. We can't date the handwriting, the tech said, only the ink profile. Not proof, direction. The initials stayed initials, HL, a coincidence if you needed it to be. A connection if you didn't. The town gathered for a small briefing in a municipal room that had once hosted potlucks. Photos on an easel, a roofline in mud, the VIN fragment, the UV still of the line. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Questions lined up behind teeth, but most didn't come out. You can only ask so many times who and why before the room starts answering with shrugs that mean we don't know, or we aren't saying. On the way home, Marla drove past the fence of the off-road course and stopped where the chain link dipped an inch at the bottom. She watched dust lift and settle like breath. The land had given one thing back. It did not owe her more. She wrote one sentence in her notebook anyway. If the car could be hidden and still be here, what else is here and not seen? Some truths hide in what's gone. Claire had a habit everyone on her shift knew about. A personal camcorder mounted low on the dash, angled just over the hood. Not department issue, hers. She'd said it helped with reports, helped with memory, helped her keep a clean chain when the night got messy. She never bragged about it. She just clicked the mount and rolled when a stop turned from routine to, write this down. When the cruiser came up from the gulch, the mount wasn't there. Not the device, not the bracket, not the adhesive pad. What remained were 2 bare crescents in the vinyl. Clean scratch arcs where the mount's feet had once gripped and been lifted. No torn foam. No ragged glue islands. The kind of absence you get when someone takes a thing off on purpose, not when heat knocks it loose and gravity does the rest. An evidence tech leaned in with a flashlight, angled the beam and whistled a thought he didn't want to put into words. He dusted the area anyway. Prints don't last 16 summers in a car that became an oven. Nothing useful lifted. Still, the arcs told their own small story. Unscrew, lift, wipe, go. Back at the station, Marla asked to see any inventory sheets from before the car went missing. The kind of end-of-shift checklist that log what rides with the unit. Radio, shotgun, flares, first aid, camera. The sheet for Claire's last cycle showed camera, personal, onboard Y, with a doodled checkmark next to the line. The recovery inventory from the gulch listed camera NA, no device, and mount Hay W. Absent. A tech had written, dash marks, possible bracket. See photo. In tidy block letters. If the camcorder had been there when the car went into the wash, the bracket would likely have ripped, leaving adhesive and foam. If it had never been there at all, there would be no arcs, no polished half-moons where the sun couldn't reach. What existed was the third option. It had been removed before the car settled into its clay cradle, which pointed to the question everyone wanted to say and no one wanted to hear. Who got to the car first and when? The department's early line, repeated in careful tones, was that the area was searched in 83, Ridgeline Service Road, downstream from the pull-off. But the gulch where the cruiser rested wasn't scuffed, wasn't rope-marked, didn't show the boot stamp freckles you get when teams climb down and back. If they had been here with purpose, the land would have recorded it. The land had recorded only one heavy descent, the cars and years of quiet after. Reporters asked why the first search hadn't found a 2-ton sedan sitting 30 feet below grade. A captain drew a contour map with his finger in the air and said words like line of sight and shadow and vegetation density in the mid-80s. He wasn't wrong that washes change, that brush grows, that shadows move. He just wasn't right enough to square the picture with the clean bracket arcs. The timeline bent. Either someone accessed the vehicle before it went into the gulch, removing the camcorder and leaving the tidy arcs, or someone accessed it after, in a window of years when the area was searched but not this pocket, and then left the car hidden again. The first scenario suggests control. The second suggests guardianship, both quiet, both deliberate. Marla read through the tow log, the scene log, and a list of names who'd had hands on the car from noon to dusk on the day of recovery. She circled 3 she didn't recognize and left them uncircled anyway, because suspicion is not the same as proof. Instead, she copied hours, bag numbers, initials, and the note about the UV ink profile from the Q route folder. Late 80s fluorescence on a car that vanished in 83. Who arrived first? The record said hikers. The next arrivals were deputies whose names matched the perimeter entries. The mount's absence pointed to earlier hands. The searched in 83 claim told a comfort story. The arcs told a mechanic's story. Those 2 stories didn't quite touch. At night, Marla re-listened to Gloria's cassette, the steady 1066, the clean copy, the white space in the official transcript, and pictured the dash with its 2 pale smiles cut into it. Sometimes the most honest photograph is a negative. What should be there and isn't. The town wanted this part to make sense. It didn't, it made shape. A pair of crescents, a missing camera, a claim about a search that read more like a wish. Before the week ended, the department held a small availability. A reporter asked again if the area had truly been searched. The captain said yes, then, to the best of our recollection, then our records indicate. 3 different answers in 12 words. Marla wrote them down in her spiral and underlined the phrase records indicate. A second question came from the back. If a personal camera was routinely on board, why isn't it on the recovery list? The captain paused long enough for the room to hear what silence sounds like in fluorescent light. We're still reconciling the inventory, he said. Reconcile is a word that means make 2 things agree. Sometimes it also means choose one. He kept his shop like a toolbox, everything squared, everything reachable. Walter Pike, part-time fleet mechanic in the early 80s, full-time fixer since he could hold a wrench. Marla found him by following an old roomer to a newer address and asking the kind of questions that either shut doors or opened them a little. His door opened. I remember her, he said without prompting. Didn't talk much. Newer car. On a late afternoon, 3 weeks before Claire vanished, she'd rolled into the lot and asked for a brake line check. Not an oil change. Not tires. Lines. Walter raised the sedan, put a light on the undercarriage and found nothing obvious. No wet flare nut, No spongy pedal in the bay test. He bled the lines anyway, topped the reservoir, wrote a note on the ticket. When he lowered the car, Claire leaned against the fender and did something unusual for an officer on a schedule. She waited until the bay door rattled shut. "If something happens to me," she said, low and matter-of-fact, "look here first." She tapped the corner of the paper where the work order number sat. Then she signed and left. Walter didn't tell that story for years because it didn't feel like a story, just a line that kept ringing in his head when the town changed how it spoke her name. He dug into a banker's box and produced a stack of carbon copies bound with a rubber band older than both of them. In the middle, a work order with Claire's unit number and a scribble he recognized as his own. Bleed inspect. No leak visible. Pedal firm. The number matched the month. The handwritten time matched a day when he remembered staying late to finish a city plow. "Did anyone from the department ask for this after she disappeared?" Marla asked. "No," he said, and tilted the ticket toward light like he still didn't trust things that lived in shadow. He had one more small memory, a hairline nick on the forward line's protective sheath. Near the bracket, not a breach, just a scrape that looked like a tool had slipped and then been wiped clean. "Happens," he said. "Happens more when someone's rushed." Back at the station, Marla requested vehicle maintenance files for Claire's unit, service logs, parts receipts, anything that would pair with Walter's copy. She filled out a form and waited under ceiling tiles that hummed like anxious bees. The clerk returned with an apology that came pre-folded. There'd been a storage mishap. A small electrical fire in the archives room had damaged a row of boxes. No injuries, no report needed. Unfortunately, among the damaged materials were several boxes from 1983-1984, including some unit maintenance and personnel files. The words were precise in the way a dull blade is precise, pressure without clean cut. "Only those boxes?" Marla asked. "Seems like it," the clerk said, voice going quieter as the sentence got harder. Old parking citations next to them were fine. So were training pamphlets from '86. He slid a handwritten index card across the counter, box IDs and a note. Destroyed, heat, water. No incident number. No fire marshal signature. No vendor invoice for cleanup. Just the tidy word mishap. Later, a custodian who knew the building's bones told Marla the breaker for that aisle hadn't tripped in years. "Lights on a different circuit," he muttered. "If you ask me what burned, I'll tell you paper. If you ask me why, I'll tell you I don't know." People started saying the word coincidence the way you say bless you, automatically, to keep a room polite. Marla made copies of Walter's ticket front and back. She logged the work order number, the date, the note about the nick near the bracket, and the sentence Claire had spoken with no drama at all. "Look here first." She placed the copy beside the recovery inventory that listed camera, NA, and the dispatch side by side showing present versus erased. Thin things, kept on purpose, begin to look like a pile. At home, she wrote a page titled Boxes and Fire and left blanks for the things institutions usually track. Incident ID, reporting officer, fire department call log, vendor invoice, insurance claim. She left them empty on purpose, then underlined the row of emptiness like it was a line of text. If you want to lose a trail, you can cut the path. If you want to lose the map, you can burn a shelf. The attic over Claire's old garage held the kind of dust that remembers names. Marla climbed the ladder with a flashlight and the patient dread of someone who's learned that the smallest boxes weigh the most. Behind a crate of winter coats, she found a metal tin wrapped in oilcloth, rubber banded like a secret. Inside, 3 rolls of 35mm film, brittle leaders curled like dried leaves, and a note in Claire's tidy print. "Keep safe." The film was too old for a 1-hour lab. A preservationist coaxed the images out frame by frame, the way you teach a skittish animal to eat from your hand. What surfaced wasn't clean, but it was clear enough to name places and times. Roll 1. Night shots at a dockyard under a narrow bridge, the same kind of span Claire had sketched in a notebook 2 weeks before she vanished. Crates lifted out of an unmarked van, then moved to a skiff with no numbers on its hull. A figure with a badge on a chain stood a little too far from the work to be a worker. Roll 2. A row of storage units, door numbers stenciled in block paint. 114 sat in the center of a sequence like the subject of a portrait. 3 frames later, The same door half raised, shadows at the sill, a hand passing a duffel out to someone just off camera. In the corner of one frame, a license plate fragment, state tag, last digits. The same pair Claire had murmured to herself weeks earlier when taillights drifted into brush. Roll 3. A black sedan, shot over several nights, sometimes through a windshield, sometimes reflected in a side mirror, sometimes so close the frame held a grill and nothing else. On one pass, the driver's face is a profile in motion, blurred but repeatable if you know where to look in old yearbooks and promotion photos. The preservationist packaged the scans on a disc and handed it over like you hand someone a live wire. Marla drove home with her hands at 10 and 2 and placed the disc beside the Q-Route folder photocopies. 2 days later, a brown envelope appeared, no return address, typewritten label that read simply, "For you." Inside, one posed photograph, not surveillance taken in daylight years ago, 3 officers at a community event. In the foreground, a badge-catching sun. Across the bottom of the shield, a fine diagonal scratch, the kind you'd notice only if someone told you to look. The number stamped above it, 7431. A second item in the envelope, a loose badge, old issue, same scratch line. No chain, no explanation, just weight on a palm. Marla found the number in the directory. 7431 belonged to an officer who had been around in '83, who had worked the initial search, who had since moved through assignments like a stone moves through water, leaving ripples that stopped just short of splash. He was, as of last month, still active. The morning after Marla keyed the number into a notepad, a notice went up in the city bulletin. Retirement, effective immediately. No ceremony on the calendar. No photo in the hall. Just a line in a PDF. She brought the film frames and the badge to a reporter she trusted to keep quiet first, careful always. He looked at the scratch, then at the posed photo, then at the mirror-shot profile of the driver in the black sedan. He didn't say the officer's name out loud. He wrote it on a sticky note and slid it back. Marla shook her head and wrote "alleged" under it, then "still verify." Truth without care is just a spark in dry grass. The reporter's researcher pulled property records on the storage facility. Unit 114 had been leased to a shell company that dissolved in 1991, the year several people in the story either moved, retired, or learned new words for silence. The leaseholder on paper didn't exist outside of that paper. The payment history ended the month Claire's car was found by hikers who weren't supposed to find anything. Circles widened. People who had been footnotes in other files began to reappear as initials. HL on a torn log page, 7431 on a scratched shield, 114 on a corrugated door. Numbers aren't proof. They are doors you can choose to walk through or board up. Marla put the loose badge in a freezer bag and wrote the date across the top. She labeled the film sleeves and printed contacts. She called the preservationist and asked for chain of custody letters, then taped them inside the folder. Paper doesn't protect you, it reminds you. In the quiet of her kitchen, she set the posed photo beside the mirror shot and felt the space between public smiles and private nights collapse to the width of a scratched line. When you lay thin things side by side, sometimes they start speaking. Marla began with a yellow index card and a pencil, then graduated to a wall, pushpins, string, copies. She pulled case lists from neighboring counties, the kind reporters compile for end-of-year roundups no one likes to read. Missing women. 2 labeled runaway. 1 labeled domestic, 1 stamped no foul play suspected. Dates staggered across the same 5-year gap when Claire's trail went dim. Different towns. Similar distance from rivers and ridgelines. Similar notes about late-night calls that didn't go through. Name reappeared like a watermark. An investigator who had touched the initial interviews in 2 of those counties and had countersigned an internal note in Claire's file years. Before the archive, mishap. Not proof of anything on its own, only a repetition. She wrote the name once on an index card, then wrote appears here, here, here under it and circled the verbs instead of the person. Suspicion needs verbs, not villains. She and the reporter drafted an article, then watched it stall in edits that never finished. Emails went oddly bouncy. A draft vanished from a shared folder, returned with paragraphs missing, then disappeared again. The reporter called a friend in cybersecurity who said the quiet thing out loud. Your accounts are being probed. The paper's lawyers suggested waiting for further confirmation. Waiting is another word for cooling. Amid the stall, a cabin surfaced in a memory. Not a resort place, a family uncle's place near Mirror Ridge, a spot Claire would drive to when the town felt too close. The property had been sold 5 years after she vanished by next of kin. No one in the family recognized. The signature looked like a tired version of a real one. Marla drove up anyway, half expecting a padlock. The cabin leaned but held. Inside, the furniture waited like a room that remembered people but not their names. A rug dragged a little too smoothly across the floor. Under it, a trapdoor. Below that, a crawl space, dry, low, lined with stone. The air smelled like time. On the far wall, under a film of dust, a message scratched in letters that cut skin if you touched them wrong. I'm still here. No bones. No clothes. A scrap of cloth with a pattern that matched a long-ago uniform. Marla called it in anonymously. The report that followed used careful words. Markings consistent. Hand characteristics comparable. Nothing that said fact. She clipped the report to her file and slept 2 hours that night. A week later, the cabin burned. The news called it vandals. The incident sheet used an arson code and then went unhelpfully quiet. When Marla asked for the crawlspace report, the clerk blinked like a film had jumped a frame and said it wasn't in the system anymore. Maybe it was reclassified, he offered, which is a word that can mean misfiled or moved or missing. The town changed how it grieved. People began leaving lilies at the cliff where the cruiser had been winched up, not on a schedule, just when the day required doing something with your hands. A plaque showed up in the park one morning without a city order. Sergeant Claire Rains, 1951, unknown. You never walked alone. The department said they hadn't placed it. The city said it wasn't on any list. It stayed because sometimes a town decides it has the right to remember, with or without permission. Marla stood by the plaque at dusk and felt the way stories press themselves into ground. Patterns aren't answers. They're maps that tell you where to keep looking. Pressure isn't proof. It's the weight that forms when people push from both sides of a closed door. She wrote one more line on the wall at home. If paper can vanish, put copies in hands. Then she started mailing packets. There are 2 honest ways to read this story, and neither offers a neat bow. In the first, the night tightens around a trusted uniform. Someone with access, maps, tapes, cars, moves pieces an inch at a time until inches add up to absence. The pencil arrow becomes a path. The let it go becomes a gate. The bracket scratches on the dash say a device was taken off, not lost. The UV line, it wasn't supposed to go this far, isn't apology. It's acknowledgement. A hand writes HL because initials feel safer than names. The car sleeps in clay while the town sleeps on questions. In the second reading, the circle is wider and quieter. Institutional silence, and maybe even relocation, trades answers for a working version of safety. The erased dispatch segment prevents a timeline from hardening. The archive fire removes the paperwork that would let a citizen trace hands across years. A cabin report is reclassified into air. Someone leaves lilies because policy can't. In this version, the line "I'm still here" in a crawl space is both a survivor's stubbornness and an institution's shadow. Still here can mean alive or it can mean unanswered. Both readings keep the same stubborn facts. A route that bent, a call that existed, a camera that's missing, a badge with a scar. Both honor the same person. A woman who did her job the way work is supposed to be done. Steady voice, careful notes, quiet courage. At dusk, the plaque in the park catches low sun. The letters aren't gold. They only look that way when the light decides to make much of them. Marla comes once a year with a small box. Fresh photocopies of the pieces that still fit. The rookie's torn page. Gloria's side by side. A VIN fragment. One film contact with a door numbered 1 and 14. She replaces what's faded, not because paper will convince anyone who doesn't want convincing, but because keeping a record is how you refuse subtraction. She sets the copies in a thin stack under the flowers and says her sister's name out loud. Names are anchors. Without them, stories drift into rumor. She watches the streetlights wake one by one like the town remembering in sequence. Truth buried is still truth. It waits. In clay. In margins, in the space a camcorder mount leaves behind. In the way a voice on tape holds steady when it could shake. It waits in the sentences that sound like procedure, and the ones that sound like warning. It waits in the lilies, too. Delicate things people carry to the edge of a story when they don't have a key. If this felt true to you, if a detail stuck, the map arrow, the let it go, the twin arcs on the dash, the scratch across 7431, share the one that won't leave. Put it in the comments where other late-night listeners will see it and know they weren't the only ones awake for this. And if you want more careful, calm cases told without shouting, subscribe. It helps this work continue, and it tells the algorithm that quiet persistence matters. We end where we began, with a night that looked ordinary until it didn't, and with a town that learned the difference between silent and silenced. Somewhere answers exist in boxes that didn't burn, in people who still carry names they don't say. Until they surface, we keep a place for them.